Fantastic. I think we'll make a start here. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this, our fifth evening with the Archivists webinar. I'm delighted to see so many of you here with us this evening. It's really wonderful that you're able to join us. I am Ellie Horrigan. I am the Alumni and Development Manager here at Manchester High School for Girls. And I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Gwen Hobson and Pam Roberts, our two brilliant archivists. I'm sure many of you will know them already, having either been former colleagues or you may have been taught by them, or you may be friends from other realms. But we are absolutely thrilled that they are giving their time again this evening to share some fascinating stories with us from the archive. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So Pam and Gwen have been working tirelessly on an exhibition to commemorate the contribution made by Manchester High women during the World Wars. This was shown initially, this exhibition, in July in school, but we thought it deserved a wider audience. So here we are this evening, broadcasting to the world. As today is Armistice Day, it seemed the ideal moment to introduce this exhibition, which is about to be online on MHSG Times. Gwen and Pam will talk briefly about the school itself during both World Wars, and we'll have more details about how to access the exhibition shortly. A few little bits of housekeeping before we begin. Please do keep your cameras and microphones off. I think all the settings are enabled at our end for that to be the case. But if you ask a question, I will pose it from the chat. So please do put any questions you might have in the chat as we go along this evening. There'll be a break for questions about halfway through and more opportunity for questions at the end. So if something comes to you midway through, do just pop it in the chat and we'll answer it at an appropriate point. Also, this evening is being recorded, so that's another reason to perhaps keep your cameras and your microphones switched off, as it will be published online after the event. And now, without further ado, I will hand over to Gwen and Pam for some fascinating stories from the archive. Thank you so much.
So, good evening, everyone. We're really pleased to be with you all today, and we're thrilled to be able to share some of the stories from our World War II exhibition.
The exhibition was inspired by a conversation we had with one of our alumni, Sandra Webb, who we are delighted to say is here with us today. And she's very interested in military history and is a serving member of the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. And she was very keen to find out if we had anything in the archive about what Manchester High girls had done during the war.
Yes, we all thought that it would be a brilliant idea to have an exhibition so that we could retell some of the stories about the contribution made by Manchester High women, particularly in the services. And we're hoping to tempt you into exploring the whole exhibition online after the event. So we're now going to start sharing our screen so that we can show you some of the photos and documents from the exhibition. Is that okay, Ellie?
Indeed it is, thank you.
Marvellous. Okay. So interest in the role of women in World War II has grown enormously in the last few years. So we started by reading lots of books that have just been published. And if anyone is interested, let us know and we'll share the titles with you.
We also visited the Imperial War Museum, both here in Manchester and in London, as well as Bletchley Park, because as you will see, at least 3 of our girls worked there. And we'd strongly recommend, I think, a visit to Bletchley Park if you haven't already been there. It's fascinating.
And then we put out a plea asking current parents and former pupils for any stories that they would like to share. And we were delighted to receive some really fascinating responses, which we'll also talk about today.
And then finally, we turned to our own archive. Sandra had combed through old school magazines from the period and had drawn up a list of old girls who had reported on their work in the services. And then we searched through the archive for as much information as we could find on each of these women. Sadly, for some of them, there was only a brief mention of their service, but for others, we found lots more information and first-hand accounts of their experiences. And these are some of the stories that feature in the exhibition.
Of course, we had to think about data protection before we made the stories public, because we can't talk about living subjects without their consent. And to our amazement, we found from a search on the internet that one of the old girls who features in the exhibition is still alive, and this year she celebrated her 101st birthday in America. And the story of how we found her is worth telling in its own right.
So Jean Bruce, pictured here, was a pupil at Manchester High from 1940 to 1942. She had been a pupil at St Paul's in London, but her parents thought that she would be safer in Manchester and sent her to board with her aunt for the sixth form. When we looked her up on the internet to check whether or not she was still alive, her name came up lots of times.
And we were really excited to find a recording of her talking about her experiences in the Wrens at Clark Magnet High School in California, where she now lives. And then when we scrolled further, we found an article about her 100th birthday in her church magazine. So we emailed the church to see if they would agree to put us in touch with her if they thought it was appropriate. And this they duly did. And a few days later, we received an email from Jean herself, who was really pleased to be in contact with her old school.
So we arranged to have a FaceTime conversation with her and were thrilled when she gave us permission to include her story in the exhibition. She also put us in touch with her daughter, who now lives in Germany, and we had a FaceTime conversation with her too. And she sent us these photographs and checked also the text of Jean's entry in the exhibition.
So Jean entered the Wrens straight from school. And when she was interviewed, she was offered 3 jobs: as a plotter, as a coder, or she was offered work in Bletchley Park on the Enigma project. Jean thought that working as a plotter would be most exciting, and therefore she was sent to Chatham in Kent, where she was assigned to Nor Command, monitoring shipping from Flamborough Head to Dover.
Clearly, this command was of prime importance because it had to protect the entrance to the Port of London and merchant traffic along the east coast of Britain. It oversaw naval operations in the North Sea as well, and guarded against invasion and protected trade. And in 1940, it had a major role in anti-invasion plans.
Then, after D-Day in 1944, Jean was sent to Ostend in Belgium, where her skills must have been vital, because in the sea lanes there were still mines left behind after the war, and these had to be cleared. So she worked as a plotter on a minesweeper, where she was the only woman on board, and her role was to review and to correct charts. And by then she was a leading Wren, which is the highest rank below a petty officer. You had to be 21 to be an officer, so at 20 she was still too young, but it still sounds like an awful lot of responsibility.
Yeah. There's a lot more about her in the online exhibition, so do have a look. Some of the other stories we knew quite well because we'd already had inquiries, external inquiries about them. For example, Christina Radcliffe, picture here, who was a pupil at Manchester High from 1928 to 1931. After leaving school, she went to London to follow her dream of a career in dance. She was in Malta at the outbreak of World War II and stayed there throughout the war and later made her home there.
And in addition to dancing to entertain the troops, Christina worked as an aircraft plotter with the RAF in Malta, and she was awarded the British Empire Medal in 1943 in recognition of her meritorious service and her devotion to duty during the period of heavy aerial bombardment of the island.
Christina is still regarded as a heroine in Malta. She's the subject of a musical play, Star of Straight Street, first performed in Valletta in 2018, and later in 2018 it came to London. It's a bittersweet tale of bravery, love and loss, with songs evocative of the period and newsreel footage of the Siege of Malta.
We even went to see the play in London ourselves, and it was really very
Yeah.
moving. And Manchester High even had a mention in the play, which took us a bit by surprise and it made us laugh. It contains the immortal line, "I was a posh girl. I went to Manchester High."
There's also a documentary telling Christina's story, which is another tribute to her great spirit and her tremendous contribution to Malta's defence.
So, to find out more about Christina, we would recommend Paul MacDonald's biography, Ladies of Lascaris. We did provide information for this. She was very clearly a feisty character with a great spirit of adventure.
We were amazed as we researched by the range of activities in which women were involved. And they often did work which before the war would have been declared beyond their capacity. As in the First World War, women proved that they were quick to learn new and vital skills.
A good example is Eunice Openshaw. She was a pupil at Manchester High from 1924 to 1930. She then read mathematics at Royal Holloway College and returned to Manchester High later as head of science from 1959 to 1972. And we're hoping that we've circled the correct person on this photo from 1963. If we've got it wrong, please do let us know.
In the archive, we have a copy of her wartime experiences in the RAF, which gives a very detailed account of her life and work during the war. And we've now uploaded this to Manchester High Times if you'd like to read it.
At the outbreak of war, Eunice was anxious to put her scientific knowledge to good use, so she put her name on the Central Register for Scientists. At the time, the RAF was interested in recruiting young women graduates to be commissioned without going through the ranks.
In the letter she received in 1941 from the Air Ministry, Eunice was asked, "Would you like one of the most exciting jobs available?" The terms of service in the WAF as a flight officer were given, but no hint of the nature of the work itself in radar, because at that time it was a well-kept secret.
After her initial 5 months officers training course at Loughborough, she had a month's course at Cranwell, learning the principles and practice of radar in conditions of great secrecy. And at the end of this, she and her fellow trainees were posted in twos to one of the RAF radar stations around the coast. And their role was to detect hostile aircraft on the radar screens.
After this, she did a 2-month course on the theory of radio with much experimental work. The course ended with examinations of degree standard, and once fully qualified, she was promoted to Flight Officer Signals and was paid 14 shillings and sixpence per day.
She said that the very best part of her work was in RAF Malvern, in the telecommunications research establishment, where she trained other WAF personnel. And then later at Huntington, which was the HQ of Pathfinders, i.e. airborne reconnaissance, Eunice was in charge of the calculations for the drop of flares by the fast Mosquito aircraft to mark bombing targets. And the most sophisticated and precise bombing systems of the war were dependent on the accuracy of these calculations. And this meant that the bombers were able to pinpoint targets accurately and so inflict minimum loss of life.
Nowadays,
Yeah,
I think such
yeah.
calculations would be done by computer, but at that time they were reliant on Eunice's mathematical skills and those of her team. After the war ended, the RAF was keen to recruit Eunice for a permanent position or even a civilian role in the Air Ministry. However, she felt that she would be happier in teaching and didn't want to live in London. So she returned to Manchester High in 1959, and I think there are plenty of old girls who still remember being taught by her.
Yeah. Next, we have Muriel Appleby, who was a pupil at Manchester High from 1930 to 1936. And the school magazine of July 1943 reported that during World War II, she was a sister in the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service in North Africa. And she later served as sister in the Queen Alexandra's in Brussels.
In the archive, we have a copy of her wartime memories, in which she gives a detailed account of her life during World War II.
Yes, Muriel was assigned to the Royal Army Medical Corps Hospital in North Africa, working under Field Marshal Alexander. A completely tented hospital of 1,200 beds had been erected, and Muriel's memoirs contain some wonderful photographs like this one. It was an amazing achievement. There were wards, theatres, a chapel, X-ray facilities, a dispensary, there were administrative offices, a mortuary, sisters' quarters, and sleeping and mess quarters for all ranks, and it was all under canvas.
What we found really interesting was her description of her first encounter with the new drug, which had never been used in the UK. This was penicillin, and her patient, who had developed gas gangrene, would have died without it. Penicillin at the time was fabulously expensive. It had to be injected 1 ampoule at 3-hourly intervals, and the cost apparently was £20 per ampoule.
Yeah, huge.
And at that time, it was only used for military personnel. The drug worked, and the patient was eventually fit enough to be airlifted to the UK. It saved his life.
Then coincidentally, there was an article on the BBC News website on June the 6th this year about official papers unearthed by the National Archives, which reveal how frustrated Winston Churchill was by the slow progress in securing supplies of this wonder drug, and he demanded proposals for a more abundant supply from Great Britain.
After VE Day, Muriel returned to Europe and nursed survivors from the Belsen concentration camp.
Yes, so quite a woman. But it's quite clear that women were very resilient. They travelled across the world, often for the very first time. They worked long shifts in very uncomfortable conditions, as our next story illustrates.
So we would like to thank Jacqueline Bowen, now Jackie Moxon, class of 1969, for sending us information about her aunt, Betty Bowen, who was a wireless interceptor in the Wrens, listening to messages being sent out by the enemy. She describes being bombed in London, Harwich, Pembroke Docks, and finally in Dover.
Yeah, she said that much of the work was, in capitals, extremely boring, sitting for 8 hours writing down columns of letters or figures, the tedium only broken down occasionally by words in plain language to be translated. There were 2 of them on duty at a time, taking turns to listen using earphones to the messages and then sending them by teleprinter to Station X.
They assumed that Station X was in the Admiralty in London, and it wasn't until 1970 that they learned that it was in fact Bletchley Park.
Yeah, so speaking to other special duty Wrens when they had a reunion in 1990, Betty found out that none of them had any idea about Enigma. They'd all signed a strict Official Secrets Act and had kept completely silent about their war careers. They didn't even talk to each other about their work.
And Betty said rather ruefully that much was made of the work of the decoding teams working at Bletchley, and then suddenly, in 2009, someone woke up to the fact that without the special duty Wrens working 24-hour shifts, there wouldn't have been any codes to decipher at Bletchley.
So the Wrens who were still alive finally received a letter from the then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, thanking them for their vital services performed during World War II, and a gold medallion inscribed to Bletchley Park and its outstations. Yeah, and in the online exhibition, you'll be able to read a transcription of a letter in which Betty describes her work in great detail.
While we're on the subject of difficult conditions, we have a first-hand account by Marjorie Challoner, who was a pupil at Manchester High from 1923 to 1928. In the school magazine of May 1945, she wrote a description of her work as a sergeant in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force.
Yes, Marjorie was stationed in South Devon, and she describes struggling along on night watch to reach the little block on the cliff edge where she worked. The night watch was 9 hours long, And she said that service life taught her that she could do lots of things, including sleeping soundly on the hardest bed or floor. And she even learned to like prunes.
Mary Higgins was also in the WAF. She was a pupil at Manchester High from 1931 to 1939, and she joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in 1942, working first as a plotter, moving the stands which contained details of aircraft round a map, and she then became a radar operator. She worked at RAF Curtin in Lindsey and in Skegness.
Yes, and we're very grateful to her daughter, Margaret Moss, another old girl from class of 1978, who sent us this wonderful photograph of her mother in uniform, amongst lots of other valuable documents.
It's hard to believe today that work such as hers was not recognised at the time, but the women working at Bletchley Park and other services had signed the Official Secrets Act, as we said, and they took this very seriously. Some of them died without telling their nearest and dearest what they'd done during the war. Others didn't reveal anything until the records were opened.
And this meant that women who'd done vital, secret work during the war couldn't mention their service in job applications after they were demobbed. So they had absolutely nothing to show for the highly responsible work that they'd done. And they had to be content with work that was far beneath their ability and experience. And of course, women were paid far less than their male counterparts.
We know that we had 3 old girls who worked at Bletchley Park. There may have been more, but we don't know. Dorothea Bennett was a pupil at Manchester High from 1928 to 1936, and after leaving school she studied modern languages at Newnham College, Cambridge, and graduated in 1939.
During World War II, Dorothea was one of the many Newnham students who served at Bletchley Park, working from December 1939 as a translator in Hut 3. And then once German Army and Air Force Enigma messages had been deciphered in Hut 6, they were passed next door to Hut 3 for translation and analysis by people like Dorothea.
A document in the National Archives shows her weekly pay as £3, 5 shillings. And Dorothea is commemorated on the Codebreakers Wall at Bletchley Park.
Margaret Brabs, pictured here, was a pupil at Manchester High from 1931 to 1938. She studied history at the University of Manchester and graduated in 1941. She then served as a sergeant in the WAF, and she was one of a group of only 7 women recruited to study Japanese at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, in 1943.
So the women were told that they might be posted to the Far East, but instead ended up in the centre of British code breaking at Bletchley Park. And the SOAS course was specifically designed for the RAF. It involved 6 months of intensive study of Japanese military terminology and documents.
Later at Bletchley, the 7 girls were all assigned to separate blocks, working on various aspects of Japanese code breaking. Margaret worked at Bletchley from 1943 to 1945 as a Japanese translator in Block F Air Section. The women of the Japanese code breaking team were never sent to the war front, and they never visited Japan. From the days of their Japanese course at SOAS, they worked in complete secret, and they kept their secret for most of their lives until the 50th anniversary of their meeting in 1943.
Our third Bletchley Park old girl was Lillian Nanette Gregg, who was a pupil at Manchester High from 1935 to 1938. During World War II, she worked at Bletchley Park in Block D, Hut 6, deciphering German Army and Air Force Enigma messages. The deciphered messages were then sent securely by pneumatic chute to Hut 3 for translation.
Thanks to the Bletchley Park Oral History Project, we're able to share her memories of the time she spent serving her country during World War II. And in our exhibition, there's a link to the complete transcript of her own account of her work, which is fascinating.
It is,
you should read it.
She said that her job in Hut 6, pictured here, was to sort incoming signals. She worked at a machine like a typewriter, and coded messages would come in all the time. From the first 3 letters, she knew what location they were coming from and filed them accordingly.
She was aware of what Alan Turing and others like him were doing, but she said that you never talked about your work, even within Bletchley Park. You just had to put blinkers on, do the work, and not think or talk about it. And later, Lillian never even told her husband what she did at Bletchley.
We also had old girls who served with the Land Army. Jean Brassington was a pupil at Manchester High from 1934 to 1942. She was awarded an exhibition to study geography at St Hugh's College, Oxford, but deferred her university place to enter the Women's Land Army.
In the school magazine of July 1943, Jean described her work as an entomologist and said that while our armies were fighting the enemy, she was fighting agricultural pests, from wireworms to the cabbage aphis. And clearly, at a time when feeding the nation was very difficult, her work was of prime importance.
In a completely different area, we have stories of 2 women who worked in the field of psychological warfare and public information.
We're really grateful to Janet Crook, now Janet Goddard, class of 1971, whose stepmother, Olive McGee, worked for the Psychological Warfare Bureau from 1944 to 1945. Janet very kindly sent us copies of her letters home, and you can read some extracts from the letters in our online exhibition. All the originals of the letters to friends and family in Eccles are now stored at the Imperial War Museum in London.
The heading for the letters is Polindep. This refers to the Political Intelligence Department, which was set up in 1939. Its main function was the production of weekly intelligence summaries. The letters illustrate very vividly Olive's life in Algiers, Italy, and Austria during the war. Although it must be remembered that because she had signed the Official Secrets Act, she couldn't talk about the important work she was doing, writing propaganda leaflets to be dropped in enemy territory to lower morale and encourage desertion.
But the letters give insights into living conditions, fears for the safety of her family and friends, the dangers to which she herself was exposed as the end of the war draws closer. So, again, really worth looking at.
Peggy Reekie was a pupil at Manchester High from 1926 to 1932. After leaving, she studied English at St Hugh's, Oxford. And in the school magazine of May 1945, she wrote an article about her work during World War II, planning Make Do and Mend broadcasts with the BBC, amongst other things.
Yeah, Make Do and Mend, you probably know, was a government campaign urging people to repair, reuse, and reimagine their existing clothes during the Second World War. And in the exhibition, you can read her letter in the school magazine describing her work.
We also had old girls who worked in factories during the war, following the conscription of women in 1941. Nesta Gould, whose married name was Herbert, was a pupil at Manchester High from 1920 to 1931. And after school, she completed a BA in administration at the University of Manchester in 1935, followed by a diploma in social sciences in 1936.
Then during the war, Nesta worked as a welfare supervisor of 500 women in a firm manufacturing railway engines. And at that time, this was considered to be munitions work.
Nesta wrote an article about her work in the school magazine of July 1943, and you can read the extract at your leisure in the online exhibition. But she said that her work was varied, included engaging, dismissing staff, doing records, enforcing Factory Act regulations, and giving advice on 100 different problems.
And it clearly wasn't always easy. She had to keep the peace between foremen and girls, and once got hit on the head with a tin can by a woman who resented being dismissed.
Doris Löwenstein worked as a factory canteen manageress. She was born, her story is interesting, she was born in 1924 in Stuttgart, and came to Britain in 1936 as an 11-year-old refugee from Nazi Germany. She started at Manchester High in 1937.
Doris's first post was in a factory in South Wales making billy cans for soldiers, sailors, and airmen. And here she worked on an afternoon shift or a night shift and arranged the frying of 2,000 portions of fish and chips every day. And Doris confessed that she didn't really enjoy the night shift. She then transferred to a factory in Somerset where cloth was made for Navy personnel, and she said that she was very happy there.
So we've given you just a few stories from the exhibition. Please do look at it online on Manchester High Times, because there are more stories and much more detail than we have time for tonight.
And it makes it very clear that the contribution made by our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmothers during World War II was a vital step along the path to the freedoms and opportunities that we enjoy today.
Women had a taste of independence, responsibility, and adventure, and they showed that they deserved to be treated as equals. They showed great courage and resilience, often working long hours in difficult conditions, and their vital contribution was not always recognised until far too late.
Yes, and this is why we thought we really mustn't forget our debt to them, and this is why their stories should be told again.
So I don't know, Ellie, if you've got any.
We'll stop there.
I mean, we'll pause there. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's all just absolutely fascinating, and a huge thank you to you both, to Sandra for her work in this, and also to all of you who are joining us or watching later, those of you who've contributed stories from your families. It's just absolutely fascinating to hear all this work that went on.
Can we just say that we would still love more stories? I mean, we're very conscious of the fact that Manchester High is a multicultural school, and we'd love to know more about what women in other parts of the world, not just in Great Britain, did during World War II. So if anybody has any stories, please do get in touch with us. We would love to know.
Absolutely. I will put details. I'll follow up this evening with an email to you all who have signed up. Thank you, Sydney, for sharing that link to the exhibition in the chat. That will also go in the email after this evening. If you're watching on demand afterwards, the relevant links will be in the comments in the comments section underneath the video. So all of that will come to you at some point. Yes, if you have any other questions, we are continuing. We're not done quite yet. We are just having a little pause. If you do have any questions, please do put them through in the chat. I just had a question, because obviously it's really interesting to hear how young some of these women are. You know, they were just straight out of university. Some of them barely even left school, and they were given these hugely important roles. Obviously, some of them were bound by the Official Secrets Act and couldn't even talk about the work that they were doing. But do we know anything about what they went on to do? Whether some of this work ended up sort of being used in later life to a degree?
Yes, in some cases it did, and we have given more detail in the exhibition. I think some women left the services, and as you might expect in those days, they married and they had children, and they didn't necessarily go back to the sort of work that they were doing during World War II. I think it's true to say, and particularly, as we said, the fact that they weren't able to talk about what they'd done in their job applications. So, there was no proof of the sort of responsible work. I mean, that was a really sad thing.
We know Jean Bruce, the person that we talked about first of all.
Yeah.
I mean, she. One of the questions that she was asked when she gives the talk in America to the high school, one of the children listening says, "So what happened afterwards?" And she said, "Well, I was in my 20s. I went when she finished her work in Brussels. She went, she fulfilled her dream. She went to the Sorbonne." And did a degree in French, where she met her husband, who was an American GI who was administering the Marshall Plan, fell in love, followed him to America, had a family, And then she lives in Los Angeles, and she is an expert on the. There is a village, is it Pueblo Español?
Yes,
In the
it's the Spanish village in the center of the historic center of Los Angeles, and she curated the museum. So she is a really leading light in Los Angeles. She's a remarkable woman, really is. And yes, she's
But there's
just
quite a few clips on YouTube that
you'll
you
find lots of information
showing
on
where
the internet about what she has done since leaving Manchester High.
yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic. More research needed then, I'll we're
Yes,
digging into
yes,
that later.
yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, you promised to tell us a little bit more about what happened to Manchester High School for Girls during World War II.
Yeah. So, in 1939, Manchester High wasn't in Grangethorpe Road, but still in its second home in Dover Street, so it was much nearer the centre of Manchester. And the Manchester Education Committee decided that if there were a war, children should be evacuated from the city centre and from areas which were more likely to be bombed. And Dover Street was close to factories, canals, railway stations, and so it was decided it would be safer to move the school further out of town.
So parents' evenings were held to discuss the plans and to explain that Manchester High would be participating in the government scheme for the evacuation of children. And by July 1939, just before the summer holidays, a letter was sent to parents telling them exactly what would happen if the school had to be evacuated. And in the archive, we have copies of the instructions to parents. We have, as you see on the screen, the kit list needed by each child. And we also have one of the identification tags issued to the children. Of course, they also needed a gas mask in a named container. And we know from the documents that the school had an official number, which was 375. That you can just see it on the top right of the luggage label there.
And the evacuation took place on the 2nd of September, the day before war was declared. And the girls were evacuated from school. So the girls gathered at school and were evacuated from there with their teachers. They didn't know at the time that they would never again return to Dover Street.
Yes, they left it for the last time on that day. And the girls had to walk in a crocodile carrying their rucksacks to London Road Station, now Piccadilly Station. And the headmistress, Dr. Clark, admitted later that she led the procession carrying her own suitcase to encourage the girls. But what the girls didn't know was that the suitcase was empty and her luggage was actually sent later by car because of her age. She was 58 years old at the time and close to retirement by then, and she didn't feel able to carry a heavy suitcase all that way.
So girls were put on a train to an unknown destination, which turned out to be Gatley. And they then transferred onto a bus to Cheadle-Hulme. And the billeting officers arranged for the girls to be allocated to families. Cheadle-Hulme's school took us in, and the next day, on the 3rd of September, the staff heard the declaration of war on the radio.
And it was difficult for everybody, but they made the best of it. They had a shift system for lessons. Cheadle-Hulme used their school buildings in the morning, and we used them in the afternoon. And other buildings around Cheadle-Hulme were pressed into service. And we have this photograph of an art lesson taking place above Monkhouse's shop, now, of course, in Cheadle-Hulme precinct.
The sixth forms were amalgamated, so the older girls had their first experience of co-education. And Dr. Clark wrote in her autobiography that she thought that co-education worked well after the age of 16 because neither the boys nor the girls found the presence of the opposite sex emotionally disturbing at that stage.
Yes, however, it was different for the younger girls in lower forms who were apparently tiresome in their pursuit of sixth form boys.
Obviously, many girls missed their parents, and some went home for the weekend. In the end, they hadn't travelled that far, and some parents decided that their daughters could come back home to live and travel to Cheadle-Hulme for school every day, often on a bicycle. So you could say that the evacuation was partial. In fact, we only stayed in Cheadle-Hulme for a year.
Yes, by September 1940, the new school in Grangethorpe Road was ready for us to move in, so that's why we didn't go back to Dover Street. The school on Grangethorpe Road was built in the grounds of a large private house, Grangethorpe House. And during the First World War, Grangethorpe House had been very important because the Red Cross converted it into a military hospital, and wards to house the patients were built in the grounds where the school stands today.
So on this photograph, you can see the lake in Platfields Park at the bottom. Behind it are the hospital wards, which fan out across what is now the school lawn. And then top left, you can see Grangethorpe House.
The only part of the hospital which still survives, we think, is the food room. This was once a storeroom, and it was connected to the wards by a covered way. And you can see the covered way in the middle of this photo, looking down towards the lake in Platfields.
By the 1930s, the hospital was no longer needed, and so the governor's plan was to convert it into our new school, turning the wards into classrooms.
Yes, and after a lot of work to convert the hospital into a school, we finally moved into the Grangethorpe Road site, as we said, in September 1940. And the building looked really smart, as you can see in this photo, and the girls were really excited to be there. However, their excitement didn't last very long.
In December 1940, only 3 months later, the school had just broken up for the Christmas holidays when disaster struck. On the night of the 22nd to the 23rd of December, the school was hit by a landmine during the first night of the Blitz.
The landmine reduced the new buildings to a heap of rubble, as you can see from these photos. Luckily, no one was injured in the blast. But as you can imagine, some of the girls were hoping that they wouldn't be able to go back to school after Christmas. But the headmistress, Dr. Mary Clark, had other ideas, and she called the staff back to school, even though it was the school holiday.
One of the teachers reported, "A few days later, I received a Christmas letter from Dr. Clark telling me that Grangethorpe had been destroyed by a landmine and asking me to return to help with arrangements for the coming term. We came back to damaged Grangethorpe, crunched over rubble and glass, rescued books, furniture and equipment from beneath the partially destroyed buildings, and made timetables for the new term."
Yeah, I think they even rescued things like wash basins
and toilets.
I mean, they wouldn't be allowed to do that now, I'm afraid. Yeah, so it must have been a very daunting task, but the staff rose to the challenge. And then new premises also had to be found in a hurry, and equipment and books had to be borrowed from other schools because we had so little. And then in January, the school moved into rented buildings, mostly in Didsbury, and term started on the correct day, and not a single day's teaching was lost. We're so proud of that.
Broomfield, which many people remember with affection, Worley and Central Road were the 3 buildings used to house the school after Grangethorpe was bombed in December 1940. And this photo shows a class in Central Road in 1941.
The school was eventually rebuilt during the 1940s. Progress was very slow because it was difficult to get materials and workmen during the war. The senior school began the move back to Grangethorpe Road in September 1949. This photo is from 1949. But the prep department didn't return until September 1973, a long time later.
Do you know, this is one of my absolute favourite stories from the archive. I really do love it. Just a quick question. Obviously you said the food room survived. Did any of the other buildings survive?
If I just whiz back a bit, this is what you would know as the small
gym, now the dance studio. We think that is the original gym, and it was, I mean, they managed to shore it up and put back the wall, and
that was the first building to be released.
We could be wrong. We think that was the first building to be released by the
by the War Commission.
Yeah.
So that was relatively easy to be rebuilt, But other than that, and the food room are the
Yeah,
only things.
we have one or two photographs of interiors. There's a picture of a staircase that was left intact, which we still have. But really, I mean, it was completely destroyed. It was completely unsafe. And actually, you know, it was quite widespread, the bombing, and we have in the archive a map showing the extent of the bombing in the Platt Fields area, which still is useful today if work is being done in on the school site, because they have to look for check for unexploded ordnance. So yeah, so the World War Two is still
Yeah.
it still features today in our thinking.
Yes. Well, I have a feeling that I mean, I wasn't here on the day, but I have a feeling there might have been something, perhaps was it over the summer holidays, recently, where there was something in
Yes,
Platfield Park.
relatively recently we were
Yeah,
asked if we had a map. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So these things do crop up.
Yeah, they
One
do.
question from our audience this evening, asking if one of the buildings that you pictured, whether that was used for music lessons at all. Do you happen to know?
Oh,
Oh, right. The music lessons, weren't they over to at the eastern side where
where the present
the present
prep
prep
is.
is?
Mm.
I'm not. I don't think it's on this photo. This photo here is what is
Is the
the C
central
is the central wing, the C block,
with the
Yeah,
and
staff corridor on
with the staff corridor on the top, and then just on the very edge at right angles is the corridor leading to the east wing, which at that time only had two stories. A third story was added much later in the 70s. So the music lessons were further at the far end of the east wing, we think.
we think.
Yeah, depending on what time your the person asking the question was in school.
Yeah.
But certainly in the early days, long before the music house was built. Yeah.
right. Okay. I hope that answers the question. Yes, but I do love all these wartime stories. I think they're fantastic, and that, you know, the thing that you say, we pride ourselves on, that not a single day's teaching was lost, and
Yes,
the fact that
absolutely right.
that was echoed, you know,
In
around COVID
COVID.
times when
In
we
COVID.
managed to
Yes.
continue,
Yes,
shut on the
absolutely.
Friday, reopened again online on the Monday. I think it's just testament to the willpower
Yeah.
of this school and
Yeah.
its staff. It's really
Amazing.
wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, right. So turning back the clock just a little, as today is Armistice Day, I wondered if we could end with a story about Manchester High during World War One.
Yeah, that also very interesting.
Mhm.
So the headmistress, Sarah Burstall, was on holiday when war was declared on the 4th of August 1914, and she immediately returned to Manchester. She took advice from the Red Cross and organised a small centre for making clothes and hospital supplies at Manchester High. The school was then situated in Dover Street near the university. The picture here shows that. And staff and girls collected materials and money.
Yeah, the school magazine of December 1914 reports on the need for bandages and splints. It said, with the declaration of war at the beginning of August came the realization of the need for hundreds and hundreds of bandages, which could not be obtained in sufficient numbers from the usual sources. I think we've heard that before as well,
Yes, indeed.
since then. So here are the girls making bandages with Sarah Burstall standing at the back on the right.
Members of staff and pupils did a great deal to support soldiers, their families, and people in need. They knitted socks for the troops, they made nightshirts, splints, and bandages for local hospitals, and even made hospital slippers out of felt. And they also took fruit and cigarettes and jam to the wounded soldiers at Ancoats Hospital.
Yes, the school magazine of December 1914 reports that jam making was one of the departments of relief work well known to everybody in school. 2,400 pounds of jam had been produced, and it was much in demand.
And girls also grew potatoes.
Yes, but still dressed in their dresses and white blouses, in their skirts rather. And many Manchester High girls volunteered for war work, and in some cases where they were given leave of absence from school. So Marie Bagnall, Elsie Shaw, Hilda Pratt were given leave of absence to do work as laboratory assistants at a government factory in Queensferry.
And Ruth Bailey served as at an advanced nursing station in France. Phyllis Brown worked in a hospital in Boulogne and a Dunkirk field hospital. And later she became Deputy Unit Administrator with the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, working with the British Expeditionary Forces in France.
So many old girls worked in Red Cross hospitals in the Manchester area and elsewhere. Mary Atkinson is pictured here in her nurse's uniform, and she went on to train as a doctor at Manchester University. Mary Metcalfe was a nurse in a casualty clearing station in Salonika, and after the war she stayed with the Red Cross and worked as a nurse at a rehabilitation centre on the Bulgarian-Albanian border until 1921, and later she became a midwife and was a founder member of the women's section of the Royal British Legion.
Nora Evans trained at the Red Cross Hospital in Chorlton. Then, as soon as she qualified, she signed on for special service. In 1915, she left England to go to Alexandria. She was the only member of the voluntary aid detachment mentioned in the last dispatches of General Sir Edmund Allenby for her distinguished service, and she later qualified as a dentist.
Lily Burton was one of the second cooks at the hospital in Urmston, which was mainly used for wounded Belgian soldiers. She became a doctor and was a member of the Royal College of Surgeons by 1928. So you can see that in the First World War, as in the Second, women had opportunities to take responsibility, to broaden their experience, to go abroad, and in some cases, not all, prepare themselves for professional life.
At Manchester High, some girls learned secretarial skills, and these skills were in great demand as men left their office jobs to go to war. So a number of girls filled clerical posts in Manchester and worked in banks. The Brazilian section of a Manchester bank was run solely by one man and two Manchester High girls, one of whom spoke German and the other Portuguese.
Some sixth formers worked in the chemical labs of a munitions factory, and the June 1915 school magazine reports that old girl Gertrude Entwistle had a new post in an important engineering works where her knowledge of mathematics and physics was of value, and this work had previously been done by men and counted as war work.
Old girl Catherine Corbett was one of the first two women to graduate from Manchester University Medical School. She served as a doctor in a Scottish women's hospital unit in central Serbia from 1915 to 1916. Later, she and her colleagues were prisoners of war in an Austrian camp.
Then, after her release, she went out to work among the wounded in a Scottish women's hospital unit on the Russian front, and she finally returned to England in November 1917. And we have in the archive a copy of her diary in Serbia, which recounts her experiences.
Staff also made their contribution. Mrs. Moore Mumford, pictured here, a chemistry teacher, had to give all her time to her husband's research work at the university whilst he was away with his regiment.
Miss Alice Chisholm, who taught French, did voluntary nursing at the Red Cross Hospital in Victoria Park, and some of the girls helped her with cleaning during the holidays. And she was given leave of absence to work full-time as a nurse from June to December 1915.
Miss Gertrude Powick worked as a teacher of French and German at Manchester High. In spring 1915, she was given leave of absence for the duration of the war and joined the Society of Friends Emergency and War Victims Relief Group. Here she took some training in nursing and learned to drive.
In 1917, Gertrude Powick officially resigned from Manchester High, but she maintained contact with the school, and we have lots of her letters in the archive. In 1919, she was part of a group of 20 people sent by the Society of Friends Emergency and War Relief Committee to Poland to help victims of the typhus epidemic. Sadly, she herself died of typhus in December 1919, but she's commemorated on the Heaton Chapel War Memorial.
In the early years of Manchester High, boys were admitted to the prep department, and some of those boys fought for their country during World War I. Sadly, we know that two of the boys, Wilfred Barrow and Harold Hewlis, were killed in action.
Yes, Wilfrid was a pupil from 1902 to 1906. He served in the 6th Battalion of the King's Own Royal Lancaster Regiment, and he was killed in action in the Dardanelles on the 10th of August 1915, and his death was reported in the school magazine of December 1915.
And Harold was a pupil between 1899 and 1900. He was killed in the Gallipoli campaign on the 4th of June 1915 at the age of 24, and his death was reported in the school magazine of June 1915.
So it's appropriate that today, on Armistice Day, we remember the boys who died, but also it's important that we remember the tremendous contribution made by girls and staff to both war efforts and the resilience of the school, as you said, Ellie, which enabled it to keep going despite the huge challenges it had to face.
A tremendous contribution indeed. It's really,
Yeah,
it puts things in perspective, doesn't it? It's fantastic.
it does.
To
Yes.
hear these amazing stories. Thank you so much for everything that you've put into the exhibition that you put together and everything that you've done for this evening as well. I think everybody will agree it has been so informative and so interesting to hear these stories. So thank you for all the work that you've done unearthing them. Lots of clapping hand emojis flying around. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a couple of comments and things from the chat. Professor Kate Ardern says, as a now old medic graduate and postgrad of Manchester Medical School, loving the stories about old girls who went on to become doctors through a variety of routes during World War One. And I think it is amazing, isn't it, how many of those early pupils were some of the first medical graduates. It's really fantastic to kind of have them in our alumni community. I think that's really incredible. And Gillian also said earlier, before I started at Manchester High School for Girls, we received a blue and black covered booklet about the history of the school, which I read, but unfortunately it was not with my other books, so I don't have it anymore. It's the only reason I have a vague idea of the history, because it wasn't discussed in school. But I mean, that's not the case anymore, is it? You do lots of work with our prep students and with our senior students, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, we're talking to the year 6, the oldest girls in prep, on Thursday about Manchester High during World War II as it happens.
Yeah.
So we're doing a lesson with them. Yeah.
Fantastic. And it's so inspiring for them to know the legacy of the school that they are a part of. I think it's really important.
Yes, we're doing what many of you will remember as upper thirds, year 7s. We're doing a session on the history of the school with them in a couple of weeks' time as well. So yeah, it's we love it. I mean, we were teachers. We love telling the stories. Yes.
And you're such an asset to the school. I don't know what we would do without you, without such passionate archivists digging into all these incredible things. So once again, all I can say is just a huge thank you to Gwen and Pam. A reminder that this exhibition is now available on Manchester High Times, which, yes, we saw the link in the comments earlier on. And as I say, it will be emailed out. But in case you want to go there yourself now, it's MHSG-Times.co.uk, and you'll be able to find it on there. So do take a look. There's also lots of other interesting archive information on that website. That one is kind of more alumni focused, so you might find some more alumni stories. There's a way that you can contribute as an alumna or former member of staff. You can submit your own profile to join our kind of Manchester High Across the World page on there if you'd like to. There is as well the digital archive, so that is www.mhsgarchive.org, and that is sort of the proper archive site, isn't it?
Some more research.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you have any questions, do just email us. You have our email address, we think, from other publications. So just email and we'll do our best to answer questions. Yeah,
absolutely. So to our audience, you've got, yes, lots of thanks in the chat, but thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed hearing these really wonderful stories. Do keep an eye out for our archive newsletters, which we've just started doing, and lots of archive events that we are running. So obviously these webinars, we sometimes have a tour around the school, and we've recently, last week, we just started with an archive coffee morning where we had a few few alumni and former staff back in to try and help identify some faces in photos. So I know that that's an ongoing project. So if you do feel like you could give up a couple of hours of your time to just help Gwen and Pam identify some faces from days gone by, I know it would be incredibly helpful. It really helps us to be able to use these photos in the future, you know, to share with our current students, or to help families who've lost a loved one to be able to say, here's a photo of your mother, sister, auntie when she was at school. It's a really, really worthwhile thing to do. So if you do have the time, do keep an eye out for those. But all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Gwen and Pam. It was a wonderful, insightful evening. And yes, we hope to see you again in due course. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.